You are watching an OraCloud Plus Training as a Service video snippet. Snippets are concise, targeted tutorials explaining how to use, configure, integrate, deploy, and support Oracle's Fusion Cloud applications. Snippets are delivered via FAST, the Fusion Application Support Tool. FAST is accessible via the web at www.oracloud.plus. No more watching hours of learning path style videos to get to the 5-minute snippet you need. Learn Oracle's Fusion Cloud applications in minutes, not hours. Hello and welcome to the Fusion versus PeopleSoft Catalogs or PNC pre-negotiated content comparison video. This video is intended for existing PeopleSoft eProcurement licensees looking for a comparison video of pre-negotiated content tools versus Fusion's catalog functional work area. Look, in short, for sure PeopleSoft, but even in Fusion, they call it catalogs. I really think it should be called pre-negotiated content because there are other tools which we'll talk about, and we talked about in the overview video for catalogs, that make a big difference in representing pre-negotiated content. So we'll talk about those here in a minute. It's worth noting that Fusion is often referred to as Fusion Cloud applications and or Oracle Cloud in the marketplace. Just note that they are one and the same. So again, this video will highlight the differences between Fusion's pre-negotiated content tools like catalogs and SmartForms and PeopleSoft's pre-negotiated content tools or functionality. Okay, so key comparison areas. We'll start with information catalogs, and they're also, I call them pointers. We'll talk about local catalogs, which exist in both PeopleSoft and Fusion. And we'll talk a little bit about BPAs because they're heavily related. Punchout Catalogs, again, they exist in both. Information templates, this is a Fusion tool. SmartForms, this is SmartForms in Fusion, and we'll call them Express Forms inside of PeopleSoft. And banners and news, which is something that doesn't really exist in PeopleSoft, certainly not for the requisitioner. And then lastly, content zones, because that's kind of how we pull things together and display them. And so that's going to be important because there's a fundamental difference between the two. All right, so let's get started. Information catalogs. So this is pretty easy, and it's a nice piece of functionality. I think in PeopleSoft, we had to use other procurement applications like SideQuest to get what were really fake items. Or pointer items. So PeopleSoft, the item is what you'd expect. It locks the price, etc. When you pick, pull, and order it. But in Fusion, we have an item that you really can't put into a requisition. You can see it in the UI. When you click on it, it points to almost any other URL. So what you see here is a list in the bottom right of what that item will point to. It could point to a third-party reservation portal, like Hertz in this example. It could point to internal quick start guides or help guides. It could point to policy documents. It could point to a SharePoint directory. It could point to YouTube and a how-to video. Like I said, if you want to point almost anywhere, the one thing you cannot do, unfortunately, is point to an existing page within Fusion, so a Fusion URL, at least not at this moment. So next up, local catalogs. All right, so now, unlike informational catalogs where they only existed in Fusion, local catalogs exist in legacy land for EBS, PeopleSoft, etc., and they also exist inside of Fusion. However, they've made some changes, and we talked about this in the agreements video as well, where I can create a line on a blanket purchase agreement, so think like a procurement contract, and I have all the functionality of creating a local catalog item. And so that's a big win. It's just a lot easier. And you can also take that agreement, just create the header, expose it through the portal, and have your supplier do all this work. That's a nice self-service savings, especially if you have 10,000, 15,000 items, or they change dramatically or dynamically or frequently. And so what you see here is that this particular line is using, in this case, it actually is an inventoried item, but it doesn't have to be. I can take any item out there, a carton of milk, and I can add images, supplier part numbers. Inside the supplier part numbers, I can put a link that allows you to go see that particular item on a different site for the supplier maybe. So you have a lot of functionality. This is on the BPA. The BPA becomes, with the click of a button, not hard, it becomes the local catalog. And then in the content zone, which we'll talk about last, it makes it easy to display or not display this particular catalog item or local catalog to users. 3, Punchout Catalogs. Look, Punchout Catalogs are in legacy land, obviously, and they're in Fusion. There's not a tremendous difference. I will say that it's a little bit easier. I, as a functional, non-technical user, I can set up Punchout. I don't have to know what the node is or all this technical hook-struck John. And so the nice thing is you can have some of the procurement team or fintech team that's savvy enough to come in and create your own punch-outs. So again, allowing you to manage your application easier and cheaper. So I think that's probably the big advantage in Fusion versus legacy applications like PeopleSoft. 4th, information templates. So this doesn't really exist in PeopleSoft. What I can do here is all through the UI, and this isn't as simple as the last one, but it's not rocket science either. If you have a decent fintech team, this is pie for them. And so they can create what's called a context segment. And so that might be, in this case, a business card. And then you could create underneath that context sensitive segments, meaning that these fields or segments I'm creating are aligned with or are underneath this particular, let's say if I'm going to have, in this case, this example, I'm ordering an Oracle Cloud Contractor. And so I put a bunch of fields or segments is what Fusion calls them that are specific to what I need to know about my Oracle Cloud Contractor. And then what you can see me doing is I take this grouping or what they call an info template and I call it every time a requisitioner uses this category. That's just one of the ways to do it, but it's really a nice functionality or a nice feature. And this exists on the requisition so the requester or the buyer can see it easily. And you can use this, as you're probably thinking, to capture some information that sourcing wants to know based on certain commodities. It will help them know how to source it. We'll talk more about that in different videos. Next up, SmartForms. So this is similar to what we just saw. If you have an info template, you can take it and bind it into the bottom of a non-catalog request form, which is what you see on the right here. And so that's a smart form. I would say that these are pre-negotiated content because, as you can see in that same image on the right, upper right, there's an agreement 52168. Well, if that agreement auto sources, or rather auto generates the PO from this requisition, now I've got the same thing as having an item, a catalog item. That's why I included this with pre-negotiated content. So just another way or another construct within Fusion that doesn't really exist inside of PeopleSoft. Yes, I know that you can have express forms like a business card, but it's just so much easier to create the fields, to roll the fields into a context information template, then roll the information template into a smart form and expose it within a content zone. And so you can do that very easily here. Banners and news. So as you can see on the left, you can run banners, standard web page format, upcoming sales, downtime, etc. And on the right, you can see there's purchasing news that's much easier to to edit real time, and you can add different news or tell users what to do or put hyperlinks in there or images. It's very easy, very straightforward. And then lastly, content zones. So as you would expect, this is a very simple way to do what PeopleSoft does through Security Manager and trees. I was doing PeopleSoft for 20 years, and I never wanted any piece of touching the trees and the complexity of taking different fields and assigning them to different business units. This is very easy. You just see the different types of content, you add them to the zone, and you tell the zone who can see that zone. And so this makes zoning your content or your pre-negotiated content very easy and can be done by anybody within procurement. Okay, so that's it for this video of comparing Fusion to PeopleSoft in relation to catalogs or pre-negotiated content. Hopefully it was helpful. If you have any questions, email us at feedback@oracloud.plus. And as always, thank you for watching.